Hello and welcome to the Majlis podcast, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. Our topic today is Central Asian asylum seekers in Europe. Life's hard for many people in Central Asia, but especially hard for those who speak their minds, who challenge or criticize the governments there. To stay could mean going to prison or worse. So some of these people choose to flee their homelands, but where can they go and be safe? Russia is the easiest place to reach, but there have been many times when Central Asian governments declared individuals to be wanted for crimes back home, and Russian authorities detained them and sent them back. We've seen this several times with Tajik authorities and Pamiri activists just this year. Reaching Europe is the goal. It's safer than being in Russia, but not entirely safe. And there are obstacles and red tape in Europe they must contend with. To discuss this, I am joined by Laila Nazgul Saitbek, a lawyer living in exile in Europe. Laila is the chairwoman of the NGO Freedom for Eurasia and member of the Working Group for the Global Treaty to End All Forms of Violence Against Women and Girls. Christoph Riedel, Senior Policy Advisor for Asylum, Migration and Human Rights at the organization Diakonia Österreich, or Diakonia Austria. Thank you both for joining me today. And Laila, I wanted to start with you, and I have a basic question. Most of the people that are from Central Asia that are seeking asylum in Europe at the moment, to the best of your knowledge, are most of these people political refugees?
Yes, most of these people are political refugees, and they're being persecuted by their states for either their journalism work or their activism, or simply criticizing their authorities somewhere in social networks.
And Christoph, we'll move on to you here real quick. If these people show up in Europe, in a European country, and you're in Austria right now, when they show up and they're looking for asylum for political reasons, can you explain some of the process they have to go through? I mean, who do they have to contact? What do they have to do to try to keep them getting sent back to their homelands?
Yeah, I just can speak from the perspective of Austria. I think it's a little different in every country in Europe. When they show up in Austria, they have to make an asylum application, and there is no legal help from the beginning. So they make the asylum application, and then they have to wait for their so-called asylum interview and tell everything about the prosecution. And after some weeks or months, there will be a decision. We are not very happy often with the decisions in the first instance in Austria. The second instance is much better. This is a court in the second instance. But I think the situation, the political situation in Central Asia is very underestimated in Austria by the asylum authorities. So I think they don't know so much about this region. Chances to be granted asylum are not very high in Austria.
Thanks. And do these people have to register with Austrian authorities when they're there? Surely they must have to provide some kind of address or something where they can be contacted, right?
Yeah, they have to register, and then they get accommodation by the state where they have to live for the first time. Yeah, and there is the asylum procedure going on in this time. There are some interviews, more than one interviews, and then there's a first decision whether they are granted asylum or not, or other forms of protection like subsidiary protection.
Great, thank you. Okay, and here's a question that's for both of you, and I'll start with you, Christoph, but Laila, I want you to answer the same question too. Some of these people are obviously high profile in their homelands. They had to flee for very good reason, as I mentioned in the introduction, that they face imprisonment or possibly worse, and their governments are looking for them. So what happens when one of these governments makes a request with the Austrian government and says, we believe that one of our citizens is present in your country, and there's books on transnational repression, so we know this stuff happens all the time. But what's the process when a government in Central Asia says, you're a citizen of ours in your country, they're wanted on charges, and we want you to detain them and send them back?
It's always very crucial that you can bring some kind of proof Maybe you have witnesses, maybe you have some documents, written documents that you can bring to the procedure and show that this is really true and that you are in danger. Otherwise, it's always the problem that authorities don't believe so much what they are told by asylum seekers.
Yeah, in regards to the situation where the person is searched through Interpol, for example, when this happens, it complicates the entire asylum procedure, obviously. And then, of course, this information is checked through law enforcement agencies. And I think that should probably be universal throughout Europe. In particular, in Austria, that would be usually the prosecutor's office that would be checking that information and doing the background check and the contacts and everything. And I can actually bring up this very sad example of the case that happened in Austria, and the asylum seeker's name was Showali Zoda, his below. And we have actually stepped into this case quite late. We simply didn't know that this was happening, unfortunately. With him, he was on the Interpol wanted list, and the Eisenstadt prosecutor has actually conducted a very thorough check into the allegations against him. And they issued a very extensive letter for the authorities, for Austrian authorities, stating that he is simply a political activist and is not a terrorist, by no means is he an extremist, that he is a supporter of the opposition political party. The problem is, though, even when the prosecutor or other authorized agencies do their job really well and check everything and come to the correct conclusions, the problem is the mistakes can happen at the highest level as well. And as happened in the case of Showali Zoda, the judge has simply ignored the decision of the conclusions that the prosecutor has provided. One of the things that judge actually used against Showali Zoda during the proceeding, and Christoph perhaps can probably add some things to it because he worked on that case as well. One of the things that were used against Showali Zoda were the fact that Tajik authorities have provided false information, for example, regarding the names of the parents of Showali Zoda. So they just simply they wrote in random names that he doesn't know. And when he was asked what the names of his parents were, obviously he gave the actual names. And the judge would ask, well, why is this inconsistency? Obviously, he can't answer that question. He had no control over, what the Tajik authorities did. So he obviously couldn't answer that question, and that was used against him, not in his favor. And somehow it happens very often. And especially the majority of the asylum seekers actually come with quite heavy criminal charges. And most of these criminal charges are, they sound quite scary, starting from terrorism, extremism, the organization and financing of criminal or organized crime group, for example. And when normal people that don't know what Tajikistan is or Uzbekistan is, they obviously have no idea that these charges are used against people that have nothing to do with these issues at all. And the authorities usually treat these cases, not from the point of view of presumption of innocence of the asylum seeker, that there is a clear presumption of guilt. That's how they treat it.
Oh, Christoph, you want to add something to that too? I mean, from listening to Lila, it seems like the authorities, at least in Austria, are more willing to give credibility to the governments of the region as opposed to...
The problem is in this case or in these cases, and I think this is more often that use such crime offense against the people. If there's a search warrant from Interpol, this is a completely other department in the law enforcement section of the ministry, even other ministry, which is responsible here. In these cases, the proof, if there is an extradition possible, this has nothing to do with an asylum claim. of course, if somebody committed a crime, this is not the case for asylum. So somehow it's possible that the authorities from Tajikistan or wherever trick the Austrian authorities. In this case, by giving to this Interpol warrant wrong data, wrong personal data, the authorities did not, the asylum authorities did not believe that this is the correct person who is sitting in front of them, because who does not know the name of his parents? And so in this case, this person was deported after a negative asylum decision because of incredibility. And it was not extradition because of the crime he should have committed and the Interpol warrant. So this is really tricky, yeah? and we know that this is not a single case where governments make search warrants via Interpol, wrong accusations to bring the people home. And yeah, in this case, this was very tragic because he's now in prison, for a very, very long time.
Yeah, the thing I just wanted to mention, the thing is that the Eisenstadt prosecutor in the case of Shovalizadeh has denied the extradition, so he wasn't extradited. He was just deported because of what Christoph mentioned. And also the point of this, the major problem of this situation is that these situations don't just happen in Austria; they happen all over Europe. And the worst place for us right now, that where we are facing the worst case scenarios of treatment of asylum seekers, is unfortunately Poland. Partially that happened due to war that started in Europe, because many of these dissidents have been living in Ukraine. And when the war started, they obviously fled to the nearest safe country, which was Poland. And we have situations there where politically persecuted persons were detained, obviously, because all of them have Interpols, all of them are on wanted lists, all of them have the traditional set of charges, the ones I mentioned, and some of these people we can't locate even now, and it is already over half a year later. We still don't know where these people are. It's quite difficult to defend them because they usually don't have any access to any means of communication, to internet or to telephone, to call somebody. They don't know that they can actually, try to find human rights defenders or contact some human rights organization. They oftentimes don't have access to lawyers. And we do know that there is a shortage of lawyers in Poland, obviously. It's very difficult to find pro bono lawyers in Poland, and it's very difficult to hire, those that are available for money, because many of these exiled activists simply don't have the funds to pay for the legal fees.
Thank you for mentioning that. Before we get too far away from that, I just wanted to ask, you said that after Russia started the war on Ukraine, that there'd been a jump. Can you give us a little more sense of that? I mean, obviously we don't have any numbers or anything like that, but was that noticeable that there were many more people that had come suddenly from Ukraine that were originally from Central Asia and came into Europe?
Oh yeah. We have been trying to track down several dozens actually of people, and we know that it's not dozens; it's probably more into hundreds. That there is, for example, a case that we are monitoring right now of a IRPT activist. And interestingly, he had an asylum procedure in Ukraine, and he also had not an asylum, but he also had an extradition request in Ukraine, and he actually fought it off. He applied to European Court for Human Rights, and the court issued a decision in his favor, basically stopping his extradition to Tajikistan. And they have substantiated the reasons why he can't be sent. So he has that decision, and he showed up in Poland with that decision. The problem is the Polish judge has ignored this decision by with a very interesting argument. He said this decision isn't issued for Poland; it's issued for Ukraine, which formally is kind of correct procedurally, because it's really not a decision in regards to Poland. But still, I mean, it's a decision of the European Court, and it holds the essence of the case, right? I mean, it has the context, it explains the situation, the individual situation of this person, and explains quite clearly why he can't be extradited. But he is right now in the extradition jail in Poland, and is facing a possibility of being sent back to Tajikistan. And this is not a single case. There are many of those, unfortunately, in Poland right now. And there was a case of a married couple with two small children, 2 and 3-year-old girls, actually. They crossed together, I think, 2 days after the war started. The wife and the husband both were on Interpol on charges of extremism and terrorism. Obviously, all of those charges are fabricated. They were separated at the border, and the husband was left with the 2 girls, and the wife was arrested, and she was 7 months pregnant. We still can't find her. We don't know whether or not she had a baby or whatever happened to her. We were not able to locate her still. Unbelievable, right? And the husband was arrested 2 days later. We spent so much time trying to track down the girls. Thank God the girls were picked up by the auntie, and they're living with her in one of the other European countries. But the husband is arrested. We don't know where the husband is either. So we can't track some of the people. We know that they were there, they were arrested, and what happened to them, and they vanish in the system somewhere. And there are dozens of cases like that.
Huh. Wow. It's the midpoint of the show, so I got to do my promo spot here real quick, and we'll get right back into this and talk about the attitude of governments in Europe toward the request from Central Asian governments. But first, let me remind that this is RFARL's Majlis podcast, and I'm the host, Bruce Pannier, and today we're talking about Central Asian asylum seekers in Europe. I'm joined today by Christoph Riedel, Senior Policy Advisor for Asylum, Migration, and Human Rights at the organization Diakonia Österreich, or Diakonia Austria, and Laila Nazgul Saitbek, a lawyer living in exile in Europe. Laila is also chairwoman of the NGO Freedom for Eurasia and a member of the Working Group for a Global Treaty to End All Forms of Violence Against Women and Girls. And my question now, and I guess I'll start with you, Christoph, is that, you've said, obviously, the Central Asian governments are making requests. They even have, Interpol red notices out on some of these people. But there's been a lot of work done in recent years about transnational repression and the abuse of Interpol red notices, for instance, and other law enforcement agencies by governments back in Central Asia. Have you noticed that there's been any improvement? I mean, one would think by this time the credibility of, say, the Tajik government would be very low in Europe. Even it's understandable you can't know all the political situations of all the countries you have to deal with if you're an immigration officer in Austria. Still, Tajikistan is practically a poster boy for abusing the system. Has there been any improvement? Did you notice that authorities are more skeptical when they get arrest warrants from Central Asian governments?
This is really hard to say because there are not so many cases. I think if there's really an improvement in this special case we spoke about, it was really they played a trick on this person, because giving a wrong search warrant with the wrong names of the parents. Of course, this will lead to an incredibility in the asylum procedure. So they didn't really try to get this person by this search warrant and didn't really want that he is extradited from Austria because of this criminal offense. But he was deported in the asylum case because he was not credible, because the authorities did not believe that this is the person he said that he is. And this is really a very bad trick they played on this person. Yeah, I think you are right. Authorities will be suspicious when they have this Interpol warrants and will have a second look. But if it comes like in this case, yeah, it's very, very difficult for the asylum authorities to find the correct decision.
Thank you. And Lila, the same kind of question to you. You've been doing this for years. Have you noticed that authorities are getting a little more wise to the abuse of the system by Central Asian governments? I mean, they receive an arrest warrant for a citizen who's seeking asylum out there. Is it to the point where they go, oh, these guys in Tajikistan or Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan or something? Again, they're always giving us wrong information and trying to get their citizens back illegally. Have they got to that point, or does it seem like you're just going through the same process every single time that there's a warrant out for the arrest of an asylum seeker, even after all these years?
No, I have to be quite straightforward, and perhaps it will come out a bit harsh, but that is the sad truth. The authorities aren't anywhere near this point at all right now. And we have cases in Sweden, for example, of an activist who has been tortured by the KNB in Kazakhstan, to the point where they have actually shattered all of her front teeth. And we're trying to, and actually planning to place her in the in psychiatry ward, which is a widely practiced thing there, is punitive psychiatry. And Swedish authorities, for example, haven't taken into account any of the arguments at all from even from Freedom House, or from other well-known human rights organizations. The letters of support that are coming in from these organizations are being ignored, and there is tons of asylum seekers that don't even have letters like that. It's not just that. We have tons of cases in Germany that are being treated this way. And I think it has a lot to do with, unfortunately, with low qualification of experts or officers that are working in these asylum migration offices. That perhaps it would be a good idea to, to somehow begin some sort of a training, because the person that is reviewing a case out of the region has to at least understand the context of the region, right? And not fall into these traps that are set by the authorities, because they can be quite devious, right? And we have tons of cases where authorities would try to build their cases against this activist, and they would use, when they are trying to fabricate a case, they would try to accuse, for example, a person of being in Syria at a certain point in time, and that person wasn't even anywhere near Syria at the time. He was, in another country, and he can prove it, for example. And then the authorities go back. This actually has happened, and they go back and they amend their charges, and they add something else, and they still don't stick. So the Central Asian authorities are sitting there and just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And the European authorities, unfortunately, are not seeing it this way at this moment. We have actually, trying to help out the colleagues more. I mean, I'm not even sure if authorities are even concerned or are aware of this problem in Europe. But we prepared a paper that talks about abuse of these charges by Central Asian authorities, and it's hanging on our website for colleagues to use or for asylum seekers to use. And there we tried to provide some examples of how of some indications of fabrication in the case, which obviously are not. I mean, the list of these examples is not exhaustive, because they can come up with all kinds of crazy scenarios and ideas that that each expert is going to have to analyze. And there's also an article that I wrote, and it was published on Open Democracy, which talks about the situation of asylum seekers in Europe, and it's called "Europe's Weak Protections for Refugees Leave Central Asian Dissidents at Extreme Risk." And in this article, I also tried to discuss the difference in how asylum seekers from Central Asia are being treated and compared to, for example, asylum seekers from Belarus. We didn't even know about Ukrainian asylum seekers because it was last year. It was published in October 2021. But even this example of how Ukrainian refugees are received, that it is a very strong contrast to how the asylum seekers from Central Asia are being treated here.
Yes, that's unfortunate, and I have noticed that too in the news, that it's much tougher for Central Asians to get asylum than it is there's no other way to say it than for some of the people from European countries that come in. Okay, Christoph, I hope I'll do something here that's kind of like a public service spot for Central Asians who are thinking of seeking asylum or fleeing their governments or something like that. I know we talked a little bit about the process, but I just came from Central Asia. I've been involved with an opposition group, a legitimate opposition group that the government's now banned and is cracking down on. And I finally made my way to Austria. What's the first thing I should do if I want to get asylum?
The first and best thing would be to contact really asylum experts who help you in the procedure from the scratch, from the very beginning. You have to understand how this procedure is working, and it's very crucial and important that you really informed how it works and how to conduct in this first interview, which is essential.
How do I find these people or this person exactly? Because, like I said, if basic knowledge of the language, what would be an organization or
some organizations like Diakonie or Caritas. You have to find one. It's and ask other people where they are going to. They give free advice. They have really good lawyers and specialists on the field of asylum. You have to know that in Austria, this was for many years the legal counseling is made by NGOs. There are still some who work very independent and do a great job in helping people. But you have to find them. Yeah, this is true. The asylum officer in this counseling center will help you to collect all the information you can provide to the in the procedure and maybe bring some proofs or speak with you. Who could be witnesses you could name? Who could be asked if this really is true what you said? Are there any publications somewhere where the authorities could see that this is really happening? As I said in the beginning, I think the political situation in many of these countries is very underestimated, and there is not so much knowledge. There are not high numbers of asylum seekers. Yeah, I would say the situation is very dangerous for many people who are at high risk, and so it is good when you have help from the beginning to provide the correct information to the authorities. This is very important.
Great, thank you. And I know it's hard to say how long the process takes to actually get asylum in these countries, but what is the shortest time you can ever remember that's for someone to go through the process of getting asylum in a country, in Austria?
The shortest time will be 2 to 3 months. The longest will be 10 years. So you can never say it depends on the country where you come from. It depends on the procedure. It depends if the authorities believe you in the first instance, or if you have to fight for your rights in the second instance or in the third instance. There is the constitutional court where we bring cases to. Then it takes several years sometimes to get the correct decision in a case.
Okay, thank you. And then Lila, okay, I'm an asylum seeker, and now I'm out there and somewhere in Europe, and I have to wait years, several years, before my asylum status is approved. Obviously, I'm in a vulnerable situation. What can people do? I mean, how easy is it to get a job? I mean, Christoph had mentioned that maybe the government will give you a place that you can stay. I don't know how long they're willing to let you stay there, but you have a person who really has no residency at all, and so really no right to work. And they're at risk when they leave the house because they have to worry that maybe the government in the country they came from is looking for them and might try to grab them, or something on the street, send some thugs out to beat them up. What can you do to get by in this period where you have really no residency status?
Well, in regards to the job, I guess it would be also valuable if Christoph can add to that. But generally, when the person enters the asylum procedure, the person is not allowed to work throughout the entire procedure. And the asylum seeker receives some amount of money to cover the basic needs. And these amounts are usually quite small. They vary, obviously, from country to country, but I think on average that would be 150 to 200 euros perhaps per month. And Christoph can maybe correct me if I'm wrong. And during this time, again, what can the asylum seeker do? There is really not much the asylum seeker can do. He or she may try to, continue their activism somehow. A journalist can continue trying to, write if they still are a part of the organization they used to work with, and basically try to learn the language. Unfortunately, many asylum seekers don't have access to language courses for the duration of the asylum procedure. And that privilege often is only granted after the asylum status is granted, basically. Christoph, do you have anything to add? I think you do. It would be interesting to hear what.
Yeah, everything is correct for the situation in Austria. Which is not the best, I would say, in Europe. There are really very different systems in all the countries. In some countries you can work. In some countries it's forbidden. In Austria it's not forbidden, but it's nearly impossible to find to get a working permit. So yeah, you cannot answer this question for all of Europe. But to the other question, what can you do if you are really in danger? Again, I would search for legal help from the very beginning. Yeah, in such a case, I would speak to the Austrian authorities very early and tell them this is a person of high risk, and the government is looking for this person. The home government is looking for this person. I remember some cases where it was possible to provide safe accommodations for these people where they could not be found. So this is possible, but you need help to do this. You cannot do this on your own.
Yeah, I think also walking over to any police department and registering a statement in your language, in any language that the asylum seeker speaks, laying out basically, the information that they have, whether or not they're being stalked, whether or not they have received any threats, if the threats came through some sort of a messenger, it would be great to make screenshots and attach them to the statement and submit it to the police. The police usually in the European Union, they do a pretty good job at addressing statements based on my experience cooperating with the law enforcement. Thank God, which actually a small comment took me a long time to actually not be afraid of them, not be afraid of the police in the European Union. But they usually do their jobs as well.
Yeah, because of course that's another problem for asylum seekers. Is if you come from Central Asia, you're probably really suspicious of the police and probably the legal system. Actually,
yeah, I understand this totally. This is intimidating, of course. Yeah. My advice would be look for a lawyer who represents you in the procedure. He or she can also help with protecting you in a safe accommodation.
Yeah, and there are also a number of organizations that have that work on thematic things, such as, for example, if the asylum seeker happened to be a victim of human trafficking or human smuggling, for example, there are organizations that work separately on this issue, and they usually do have possibilities to provide additional help. They also do provide, if not lawyers, they do provide funding for lawyers and safe accommodations, as Christoph has mentioned. So there are organizations, and there are plenty of them around Europe. The asylum seeker just needs to try and find them. At least try to Google things, even if it's in Russian or probably in Russian mostly. The asylum seekers from Central Asia would Google things like that and see what comes up, and Google human rights organizations and see if they can get at least some starting point there, and perhaps this because this is a really important starting point. Because some of the asylum seekers that show up in Europe, some of them do know that they can write us an email through some friends of theirs that know us, for example, and we try to provide as many resources as we can. But our main problem is that with many we can't even establish a connection. We don't know. I mean, most of the asylum seekers just fall through the cracks. We never find out that these people were here.
There is an office from Amnesty International, from the Helsinki Committee. There are Helsinki committees all over in Europe, and these are good first contact addresses you can easily find, and they can connect you with the specialists in each country.
Great, that's valuable information. Thank you. Unfortunately, we're running to the end of our program, but I wanted to give you both a chance to make any comments you wanted to that you think our audience needs to know, or anyone who's potentially an asylum seeker sometime in the future needs to know. So please, Lila, if you could start.
I think that the main recommendation I would have, a main advice I would have for the asylum seekers that reach Europe is to immediately register with the authorized government agency that takes care of cases of asylum. And if that is not possible, somehow the first contact can be made at the police department, and be as clear as possible with the situation, as honest as possible. Just explain the threats. It is always a bad idea to try and hide and stay in Europe on an illegal basis that is not going to save you, is not going to help down the road either. So do everything timely is the main advice.
Great, thank you. Christoph?
Yeah, I would say very much the same. So don't believe to the stories of the smugglers that tell you when you come to Europe, when you come to this country, tell this or that. Stick to your own story. The truth is always the best. They will find out most of the time. So it's not really happening that you will be granted asylum with a fabricated story. And yeah, I can just repeat myself. seek help from the very beginning. Try to find specialized organizations, lawyers who can help you. Sometimes when you just go into the system and wait, it can be too late for the help, or it can get very difficult for legal help when it starts too late on your procedure.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Lila.
Do we have, Bruce, do we have another second?
Yes, we do. If you want to add something, go ahead, please.
I do. I just wanted to address the authorities. Just, if we are lucky and anyone is listening to this issue needs to be addressed as soon as possible. The issue of asylum seekers from Central Asia, and somehow it needs to be brought to the highest possible level here to start this discussion, because the problem of institutional racism, for example, is a problem within the migration agencies, unfortunately, in how they treat asylum cases. The treatment of Muslim asylum seekers is a problem that needs to be addressed as well. The overall understanding of the region needs to be addressed within the authorized agencies. This is very important because when people show up and he says or she says that they're on the Interpol, that doesn't necessarily mean that person has committed some horrible crime. In fact, most of the asylum seekers that are charged with these things, when you read their papers from, say, Tajik or Uzbek authorities, investigative authorities, they usually lack very important things in them, such as, they don't provide description of any violent acts committed by that person. And the people are actually accused of extremism simply for, just knowing somebody or supporting somebody, or maybe talking to somebody who the authorities find to be their opponent. For example, if somebody is a friend of an IRPT member, and people are actually being charged with extremism simply because they know somebody from the IRPT, for example. So this awareness needs to be raised within the European migration and asylum agencies. I think it's very important because there are so many people who are suffering because they are fighting for democracy, for their rights in the region. And that is the only thing that they did. And when they come here and they're being re-victimized and they're being re-traumatized by authorities here in European Union, that's a very bad thing, because they come here in hopes of finding truth, in hopes of finding rule of law, in hopes of finding a treatment that they are fighting for in their countries and are unable to have. And they're not finding it here.
Thank you for adding that. I appreciate that. And, and on that note, too, I also want to mention that anyone who wants to know just how bad the problem is can also go to the Exeter University website, and they have a project that's called Central Asia Political Exiles, CAPE for short, and it has a long list of people who have been having to flee the country, and also goes into detail about the nefarious schemes and tricks the governments of their home countries have tried to use to get them back. But I can recommend that also. And with that, I'll have to conclude today's broadcast. But huge thanks to Lila and Christoph. I appreciate you being on the show and explaining this so well for our audience. A big thank you, as always, to Nathan Shoemaker, our Majlis podcast producer in Washington, D.C., and a reminder, you can subscribe to the Majlis podcast or the Central Asia in Focus newsletter by visiting RFARL's website at rfarl.org. Thank you very much, and we'll be back next week. Bye-bye.